Like the title of the video says, we are going to be covering Zephyr's third ability, Turbulence. Now, Turbulence is actually, in my opinion at least, her best ability. It is a very, very solid base ability, and it has a really great augment that is not only thematic, but extremely appropriate both in terms of power, design, and just in general feel. So let's go ahead and talk about what is Turbulence, what does it do. Let's go ahead and take a look. So Turbulence, you create a windshield around Zephyr, redirecting all incoming projectiles. Now, this thing is somewhat expensive. This is pretty typical for a third ability, 75 energy cost. Efficiency is pretty good on the skill. It doesn't have an incredible duration, it's only 20 seconds. It's not bad, but it isn't super good. You will find yourself refreshing this thing fairly often. And then you have a shield radius of 6 meters. So that shield radius of 6 meters is basically the point at which incoming attacks become, or I guess start to be redirected. So there's a couple special rules around how all of this works, but effectively certain types of attacks like hit scans, they don't work. You're not going to ever get hit by a hit scan attack. It isn't going to be effective. It pretty much is never going to hit you. For certain other projectiles like bombards or missile type things, the area of effects can still hit you. Things like ground stomps from MOAs or things like that, any sort of AoE can still hit you, especially anything that's initiated from a melee style attack. This includes melee attacks from certain Demos enemies that have deconstructor like attacks where they're ranged attacks but they really count as melee, and we can take a look at some of the enemy types that you might be more worried about. So let's go ahead and get into some enemy types before we get into stats. So Demos Carnus Rex, we're going to look at him in a minute. Let's start off with some heavy gunners. So heavy gunners are pretty typical. You're going to see these, quite often. You're going to see this guy hit me. I'm losing some shields. Now I cast it, and he just doesn't hit me. You're going to see him hitting like random spots, but his AoE shock attack hits me, and if I get too close, he's going to melee me, and he's going to kill me very quickly. So this is not a one-stop shop. This isn't a one-size-fits-all defense. You're going to have some layers for this to be effective. Now that being said, it is effective against a lot of stuff. So let's go ahead and jump into a bombard. Did I simulate that? I don't think I did. Oops. I'm bad. Give me 1 second. Alright, so let's go ahead and make a bombard. Did I leave a heavy gunner out? I probably did. Alright, so there we go. So you can see obviously the missiles coming at me, and you see him whiz away. One more, and there it goes. So you're going to be able to see some stuff like that where you can actually see the projectiles kind of leave. That's just me turning the ability off. And one thing that you do have to kind of be worried about is you do have a range on this ability. So you do have a 6 meter range. Now if you take negative range, it actually pushes that shield back a little bit, and it can make it to where certain attack types become a lot more dangerous. So that's going to be the next enemy we're going to look at, and I'll do a little switch. I think they're called Tar Mutalists. There we go. So you're going to see these guys cast the little puddles that you see all the time, and then it hits me. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to cast it. I'm going to stand over here, and next time he casts it, you're going to see it whiz away, right? So just right out of there. So it is very effective against most enemy types. However, if we put some negative range on, you're going to start seeing some inconsistencies in the skill. So let's go ahead and do that. I believe it's narrow-minded. So let me go ahead and reset him just so we don't have problems with that. And I lowered my range. And there you see I had my ability up, and it still directly went at me and hit me. And that is because I started pushing the ability away from me way too late. And from what I can guess is because it's sort of like a low angled attack, it pushed it straight down, which is still underneath my feet and still very dangerous. So you're going to see some inconsistencies if you lower your range. Just keep that in mind. Also, certain abilities like Scorches, you just won't have any effect on their attacks at all. Anything that's AoE by design, like the Ignis, it just goes straight through your windshield and kills you. So certain enemy types are going to be very, very dangerous. However, beams, projectiles, anything like that is going to be diverted. Just be a little bit more careful with the area of effect type abilities. So let's go ahead and look at one of the newer enemies here. And these guys have wicked melee attacks, and they have decent range as well. So this isn't going to do anything against any type of melee attacks. And some of these guys have wicked attacks in the new expansions, so just be very careful of those. And then finally, I want to show the Jugulus. I'm not 100% sure, but let's go ahead and take a look at these guys. These guys actually have a ranged attack that is very similar to, I think, a Deconstructor or Sentinel weapon, where it's a ranged attack, but it's really technically a melee attack. So yeah, not going to have any effect on those because they're not, I guess, considered a projectile. So yeah, it's going to be a little bit more dangerous, and you have to very much be aware of the type of enemies that you're fighting. That being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the stats of this ability, and then we're going to look at the augment. So, stats. This thing has Drain. It is a fairly expensive skill. You might want some efficiency. It doesn't have a super long duration. It does scale with duration though. It just makes it last longer. And both of those are going to be very important. I think if you're ever going to be playing as Zephyr, you're going to want to be using the skill always. Not necessarily always using the augment, but always using this skill. And then finally we have the shield radius. Now, like I said before, if you back the shield radius up, it is going to become a little bit more inconsistent, a little bit more dangerous. I wouldn't necessarily say never do that, because you do get a lot of duration on that mod. So I think it might be worth it, especially if you have like a mod that you can maybe foot the bill a little bit with, get a little bit of range. I think it might be okay. I personally run it with lower range, but if you're doing defense missions or you want to extend this to allies a little bit better, if allies are standing inside of your field, attacks won't hit them either, because all attacks are getting diverted when they hit your bubble. So it is a really good defensive maneuver. It just doesn't have a lot of base duration or a lot of base range, and it is pretty expensive. So you definitely want to build around this skill whenever you're playing Zephyr. It doesn't have any default scaling with ability strength. However, the augment does. So let's go ahead and take a look at the augment now. And this is, and I'm going to take a moment to just talk about augments a little bit in general. This is one of the best designed augments I think there are. So in my opinion, what an augment should be is something that adds to the base skill in a very meaningful and thematic way, but is not required, is not overpowered, but is still attractive to use. So this, I think, fits that bill perfectly. It's something that I could definitely use the ability without having the augment. It's still a great ability, but the augment does sweeten the deal a lot in very different, very special ways. So what does Dreadstream do? It gives us a 40% movement speed bonus, always really good, especially as Zephyr's more of an open air, open world kind of frame. And it also increases projectile speed by 100%. Now the 100% is obviously a very large number. It's very, very good for projectile type weapons like the Archiplasmor that you see attached to me right now, that I have equipped. This thing is really, really great to allow play styles for Zephyr that other frames may or may not be able to pull off. So let's just take a look and see. The visuals don't really change, but our distance that we fire, you'll notice that the Archiplasmor itself goes much, much further. So you see it looks sort of big and blocky, travels pretty slowly. When I cast this, you're going to see it get much further away, much quicker. Now that being said, let's go ahead and look at our abilities, and we'll see that we have the 40 and 100% down there. If I just throw on, let's say a Blind Rage, and we look at this, we do see that it scales with strength. Now the scaling with strength is really, really good, and the movement speed bonus does get very high. but the projectile speed gets even higher. So let's go ahead and take a look. This is a normal Arcoplasmor shot. And then this is the increased Arcoplasmor. So you can see this thing is definitely getting into open world levels of range when it really shouldn't. It doesn't actually have this by default. And just for reference, I don't have any projectile speed on the gun right now. So that's just for posterity. But yeah, this skill is really, really great. I think the augment is a very, very healthy addition. It's balanced, it's strong, it's thematic, but it's not necessary. It's just really, really good. So this is my favorite of her abilities by far. I think it's her strongest ability by far, and you definitely want to build around it when you're making a Zephyr build. That being said, if I missed anything or I misrepresented anything, please let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching.